we've got Portugal lending Greece money, and Portugal is equally drunk. I'm sorry, I mean broke. And so this is doomed to failure. The amount of money they put in will paper over the cracks, I would argue, technically for 12 months, but of course markets look ahead. So I would give it till October before the whole thing starts to crumble and people look at the situation in Portugal and Spain.
Well, we know what's happened in America. We have deep analysis from Griffin and Webster Tarpley and Salente, and we're very familiar with how that came about. It's a complete open robbery from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. The Congress was threatened, the nations pay off Goldman Sachs and Morgan, and the pension funds are needed to pay for the bailout. In Greece, they're having the higher retirement age, and their answer, the Bilderberger Prime Minister's answer, is to higher the retirement age and put a cap on wages. But in America, Congress wouldn't go along with this, and suddenly 1,000 points dropped. Apparently there was no fat finger. They've admitted that. 1,000 points in the market dropped. I think it was within 15 minutes. And they admitted causing panic in Congress with the black boxes and the brokerage houses, plunge protection, White House gangs, and to audit the Fed. But and then the Congress dumps the move to audit the Federal Reserve. So how obvious in Europe have you noticed? I mean, they're having reforms on Wall Street at the moment, so-called reforms. I mean, we know that Goldman Sachs bet on the housing market and bet against it, and people lost their houses in droves and are still suffering. But do you notice any similar scams in England or Europe generally?
Well, it's really it's not just a Europe-wide; it's a global, almost a global phenomenon.
Yes.
And of course, although not
totally engineered,
and the old dominions who have a completely different banking system of banking regulation. But just if we look at Europe and North America, we have to go back and look at the Civil Reinvestment Act, of course, which actually made the concept of due diligence in banking in America illegal because it was regarded as being discriminatory. So what we actually had was the abandonment of old-fashioned due diligence banking principles, and I used to work for an investment bank for many years, and what I know you understand, Patrick, but your listeners may or may not, is that banks are amoral. They're not immoral, they're institutions, they're amoral.
No.
If politicians come along and say, we're going to do this, this and this, the banking system will say, well, in that case, our reaction will be this. And that's, of course, exactly what's happened. And where we have now the situation in England, certainly, is where the banking, the Treasury, is doing what they call quantitative easing, which is just printing money. The banks aren't lending it. Their banks aren't putting it into the economy. What the banks are actually doing is buying gilts. And the same thing, of course, has happened in America, where they buy T-bonds, and they make a turn of 1% on the bonds, which is why the banks now are coming back into profit. But it is actually at the expense of the ordinary working Joe.
Well, I think it was announced today, Jean-Claude Trichet, the president of the European Central Bank, and I quote, "Global governance is extremely necessary if we want to avoid another financial crisis." He's talking about creating an international set of standards. It's that old word again, isn't it? Standardization.
Well, it's the series of old words, which is global governance. And, of course, I would argue that this is the end game. There is a very strong movement, certainly in Europe, for global governance. And, of course, the way you do that is you destabilize the international fiscal system and tell them people a problem of a disaster of your own creation, and is the only way that you can get out of this disaster is by government. And of course it's government that actually puts you into these disasters. Government is the problem, certainly in the United Kingdom. We have a deficit of 160 billion, which is on the books, but that doesn't include public sector pension fund responsibilities. Or indeed
they'll come in for your pensions next, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, public funding initiatives is another thing, Patrick, here, you see. What
Public
the problem
funding initiatives.
It's probably double. We're probably talking somewhere in the region of a £300 billion deficit. And that, if you remember in the United Kingdom election, the only figure that we heard in the debates by the three amigos on television was the figure of 70 billion structural deficit. That was a lie from start to finish. So what we're dealing with here is the politicians simply consistently lying to everybody about the depth of the problem, which they created, not the banks. The banks, the percentage of the UK deficit to prop up the banks is 20%. The rest of it is sheer management incompetence of the economy by Gordon Brown for 13 years.
Well, he was Chancellor, number 11, for that amount of years, and we can, to a point, I think, directly blame him. But aren't they just following out the bankers' policies anyway? They get a call in the middle of the night. I don't agree with that. And by the way, you've got to resign now. Thank you. How much of these bankers really directly influence what decisions are made for the British public?
Well, it was, in point of fact, it was the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, who was influenced. Now, for example, Lloyds Bank was a perfectly solvent bank. And they dragged in the boss of Lloyds Bank, a perfectly solvent and reasonably well-run bank, made him buy H-Boss at Chequers. Lord only knows what pressure was brought to bear, which actually then brought a perfectly good bank into disrepute. Now, what they should have done, the only way to deal with this, and there is a precedent here with the Japanese economy in the 1980s, they should have let the banks default. And that would have done two things. That would have sent a message for future banking, because we're going to come back to this in a few years' time.
Right.
If banks take the risk, make big profits and give themselves very big bonuses in good times, and then the taxpayer underwrites those decisions which turn out to be bad, they will have learnt nothing. And I would argue that the banks have learnt absolutely nothing. Politicians have learnt absolutely nothing. Nobody's actually learnt anything from this terrible experience, which I would suggest means it could happen again in 5 or 6 years' time, because nobody's got further forward with it.
Well, we on TNS, it's Irish for Land of the Free. This website was developed so we could offer solutions. Everybody's talking about problems and reaction. We want solutions. And I personally do blame the bankers. They run the show, they run the planet, and we know that. And their agenda is a ruthless, murderous campaign that they're waging against humanity. That's how I look at it. So I look at Peter Mandelson, a photograph of him laughing and joking with Gordon Brown while he's signing his resignation. And we know that Lord Mandelson, means he can walk into any cabinet post whenever he likes, thank you very much, is a Rothschild agent. He's always on the yacht in Corfu at the mansion. And I think behind the scenes, these are puppets. Would you agree?
Yes, I think, if I may, I agree with a lot of what you say, and you're very well informed, Patrick, I have to say. There was only one where I would perhaps take issue with you, that
sadly well informed, yeah.
Basically the bankers and the politicians are of the same kidney. They are all the same. There's no point in just... What politicians always do, blame the bad bankers. And you can go back to Edward I, when they got rid of the Jews because they owed money to the Jews. So the best thing you do is you blame the Jews. Now, you always blame the people. The Greeks are blaming the Germans now, would you believe, for lending them money. Africa always blames...
It's insane. Everything's inside out and upside down, I know.
So what we've got to do is we've got to get the politicians to own up to the mistakes that they've made. And the way of punishing the bankers was to let